Taking refuge in generating bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Abandon evil doing, practice virtue well, subdue your mind. This is the Buddha's teaching. Like a star, an optical illusion, or a flame, a magical illusion, a dewdrop or a bubble, like a dream, a flash of lightning or a cloud, so should one consider all compounded things. By this merit may we attain omniscience and overcome our enemy, our harmful deeds. May beings buffeted by the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death be liberated from the ocean of existence. The Heart of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on Massive Vulture's Mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara looked upon the very practice, the profound perfection of wisdom, and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara: how should any son of the lineage train wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, reached the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment and reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Tayato Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised as spoken by the Bhagavan. Praise to Manjushri. Homage to my Guru and Protector Manjushri, who holds to his heart a scriptural text, symbolic of his seeing of all things as they are, whose understanding shines forth as the sun, unclouded by delusions or traces of ignorance, who teaches in 60 ways with the loving compassion of a father for his only son, all creatures caught in a prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. You whose dragon thunder-like proclamation of Dharma arouses us from the stupor of our delusions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma, who wields the sword of wisdom, hewing down suffering wherever sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of all ignorance, you whose princely body is adorned with the 112 marks of a Buddha, who has completed the 10 stages, achieving the highest perfections of a Bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning, I bow down to you, Manjushri. Om Rapatsanadi. With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind. Enlighten my intelligence and wisdom so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. Outer mandala. By the virtual offering to you, assembly of Buddhas, visualized before me, this mandala built on a base, resplendent with flowers, saffron water, and incense, adorned with Mount Meru and the 4 continents, as well as the sun and the moon. May all sentient beings share in its good effects. Please enjoy and bless me and all sentient beings to be released from the 3 poisonous minds, for I am offering without attachment my body, enemies, friends, and strangers, and all possessions which are the objects of my greed, ignorance, and hatred. Mandala offering for requesting teachings, O holy and venerable Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dhammakama wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dhamma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru Ratnam Mandalakam Neyatayami. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious gurus.
Thank you very much. So I'm conscious that our teaching is coinciding with the debate between. So it reminded me of a comment. I asked one of my teachers how to deal with the kind of distress of watching people suffer in war zones on television, which, as we know, is a constant reality. And Geshe Jumper Galtson answered in a very particular way, which took me back a little bit, also intrigued me. He said that a bodhisattva doesn't look at things in the same way as do worldly people. So what I took from this, because we were at the time discussing the faults of the self-cherishing attitude in relation to Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life, as it turns out, Geshe Jumper Galtson was making the point in a reiterated fashion, all our problems in the world are produced by self-cherishing. My car, my body, my friend, my happiness, on and on and on it goes. So my nation, and he gave the example, my border. So as we know, border wars are absolutely at the heart of the world's current perceived problems. But the invitation here, according to the kind of Buddhist analysis, is to take several steps back and locate the source of all of our problems, including our societal ones, in the self-cherishing attitude itself. So this is taking us right to the heart of why we're sitting together today to explore this extraordinary text. So let's just spend a few moments withdrawing our mind from our preoccupations in our daily affairs or nightly affairs in America. Just locating ourselves in the sense of becoming aware of our bodies. And also aware of our minds. So in order to invigorate our minds for the session ahead and to relax our bodies to support that, for a few moments we'll let go of any tensions, whether physical or mental, with the out-breath in the form of smoke, which dissolves away on the horizon, never to return. Then, with the immediate in-breath, radiant light pours into our body, pours into our mind, releasing any tension, even subtle levels of tension, which then leave with the next out-breath in the form of smoke. So just pursue this visualization in conjunction with our own experience for a few moments. If distracting thoughts also arise while we're doing this, we simply let go of these with the out-breath as well. And now, having brought some stability to our mind, we motivate for the session ahead, feeling that our sole purpose in spending this precious time is to generate within ourselves the extraordinary precious mind of bodhicitta. And for this, we need to acquaint ourselves, become truly familiar with the Bodhisattva's precepts, the principles by which they engage the world and others. So we hold this motivation, this pure motivation in place throughout the session and dedicate at the end. So with that, we'll begin. And the material today is very, very practical material. Hi, everyone. So don't feel that you're going to be stretched or stressed by the content. In fact, it's going to invite us over and over again to reflect on our own situations and try to come to some determination about where we stand in relation to these practices and how we might begin to develop them experientially or realizationally in our own lives. So we have arrived at the fifth subheading, the benefit of making others happy. And this was a subheading found under the main heading, skillfully interacting with others in a virtuous way. So this subheading pertains to verses 77 and 78. They read, "All deeds of others are the source of a joy that would be rare, even if it could be bought with money. Therefore, I should be happy in finding this joy in the good things that are done by others." And 78. "In this life, one will be peerless, and also on the other side will be great happiness. Faults causes unhappiness and suffering, and also on the other side there will be great suffering." So last week I laid the foundation for this practice of joy in the account of rejoicing, as indicated so beautifully and poignantly by Kabje Zopa Rinpoche. Gyaltsabje renders the meaning here as follows, quote, all the actions of the three doors are to make others happy. So it's worth repeating, all the actions of the three doors are to make others happy. Hence, this happiness of others is so precious that it is priceless, like a rare object that cannot be bought even with great wealth. End of quote. So the logic here is perhaps devastatingly simple, because as trainee bodhisattvas, or at least aspiring ones, all of our actions are performed and dedicated as sources of joy to be enjoyed by others. So it is hard to comprehend, however, just how hard it is, how utterly rare and how utterly marvelous it is to find such an attitude. Such an impulse that, as it arises within us, is totally, exclusively focused on the welfare and happiness of others. How could such an awareness be not a source of joy to us? Therefore, it is absolutely natural, one might even say logically inevitable, that when I see others happy, I should instantly and powerfully rejoice, because this is precisely the experience I'm seeking for them throughout all of my own actions of body, speech, and mind. So it'd be illogical, wouldn't it? Illogical not to take joy in others' happiness. That's exactly what we want for them. Gyaltsabje indicates that this rare quality of wishing others happiness will have spontaneous benefits, however, also for ourselves. But we must qualify this by indicating that it's, however, not our prime focus as we engage in actions of benefit for others. We might call any gains that we experience on a personal level boons, B-O-O-N-S, not a word we don't get to use very often, referring to kind of delightful corollaries, incidental gains, as it were. So Gyaltsabje says, therefore, with the quality of making others happy, others will not be jealous of oneself in this life. By practicing the happiness of joy in this life and making others happy, one will no doubt also receive possessions and so forth. And in the life beyond this one will also find great happiness. This is what Shantideva was referring to as on the other side. So this does pertain to the first two lines in verse 78. Through doing this, I shall suffer no losses in this life, and in the future lives shall find great happiness. Gyaltsabje then addresses the last two lines of the verse, which read, but the fault of disliking their good qualities will make me unhappy and miserable, and in future lives I'll find great suffering. So Gyaltsabje comments, otherwise, as the shortcomings of being angry at the qualities of others, as the shortcomings of being angry at the quality of others, one will experience in this life unhappiness and physical suffering, and also in the next will experience great suffering. End of quote. So the benefits of making others happy are being expressed in this twofold way. Likewise, the dangers encountered if one instead proceeds on the opposite basis, actively disliking it when others are happy. What a dreadful, miserable fault that truly is. It's a twisted species of schadenfreude, whereby we experience delight and even joy when we hear of others suffering. I say it's a twisted, inverted form because here, according to this miserable attitude, which isn't happy when others are happy, we experience feelings of misery ourselves when we see others happy. And this crazy stuff. We ourselves become unhappy when we see them being happy or enjoying themselves. How can this bizarre state of affairs come to be? So I'm going to ask, how can this possibly be? Does it ring any bells from our own experience? We might have to...
Just jealousy.
Yeah, it's a very good example, isn't it? Yeah. And how much control does one have over one's jealousy?
Actually, you can control it.
You can.
You can, but it takes a very long time.
Yeah. Are there any other suggestions?
I've got more of a question.
Yeah.
What if you observe somebody who is happy, but happy because they have caused others pain?
Yes, that's a tricky one, isn't it? I think we have to be skillful here. I think this came up once before, actually, the same question, and I attempted to wriggle out of it by saying that if we're really being a bodhisattva, we have to be able to embrace the difficulty in the behavior of the other person in a way that doesn't let us lose sight of our wish for their happiness. But that does not require that we condone their negative actions. So if we take that on board, we can steer away of saying, well, at least you're a little bit happy at this moment, but it's a twisted, perverted kind of happiness, and how wonderful it would be if you were able to generate a more realistic kind of happiness. So you certainly wouldn't take delight that they're happy in any silly, trivial way at all. You'd have to sort of look into the situation very deeply. Now, it's probably also the case, to take a milder example of your question, because it's a good question. When I see others delighted in their children's achievements, I feel joy. But if they then don't feel delight in the achievement of other children, because they're focusing on the achievements of their own, even in competition to the other children, do I feel joy? So it's really the same idea. So it's coming up all the time. So I think it's necessary here to keep a fundamental understanding of a mind of virtue. It's nature. And so we're kind of delighted when others experience the fruits of virtue, one might say, and therefore experience a delight of some kind.
And I think we could also, the argument could be, taking joy in someone else's pain is not really happiness. They're not really experiencing. We could argue that they are not really experiencing happiness if it's joy in others' pain. That argument.
Yeah, I think you'd have to say that, Jay, because it's a very bizarre form of happiness if it's there, isn't it? Yeah. So sadism does exist, unfortunately. Sadistic tendencies do exist. Bullying, which is rife on the internet, on social media. In fact, it's so rife that young people are being driven to self-harm and even suicide on almost sort of unprecedented levels. So this is a real social problem we're having here in Australia at the moment with social media, and there's talk of banning access to social media, but below the age of 16, for example, in a bid to somehow address the psychological turmoil that is arising in youth in our current sort of media environment. So these are huge social issues and very real ones. What kind of person takes delight in wounding another on social media, someone that they haven't even met? We've got one schoolboy here in Melbourne from a well-respected private school who is currently in deep trouble because he using AI technology or sophisticated photo technology undressed his female schoolmates in his class and posted those images online, and they were shared amongst their mutual friends. Those young women have been understandably devastated by that act. And so the question, comes down, how do we start to tackle these problems in a responsible way? So I just raise that because these aren't distant problems at all, are they? That boy took delight in that act. So that's the equivalence with what you're bringing up to here, Jay. So clearly no one would condone that act, the joy that he might have experienced, as somehow worthy joy at all. Yeah. Is it all right to go on? Or to something else? So one can only conclude that such joy is only joy according to the deformed mechanisms of compulsive self-cherishing, whereby concern is exclusively focused on ourselves. According to its script of self-cherishing, which is at once blatant and insidious, our happiness, my well-being is all that matters. All that matters. All that counts. And if others have the temerity to somehow display that they are happy when we are not, we acutely resent this fact if we're operating on the basis of self-cherishing, and go as far as to wish them to suffer instead, or at least be stripped of their joy. So again, social media has become a mechanism for people to strip other people's joy. Someone posts an innocent holiday photo, and then someone comes in as a troll and makes fun of that person's physique on the beach on a Greek island, and wounds them in that moment of sharing their simple holiday pleasure. So self-cherishing is the problem. These people don't deserve to have their happiness stripped away. And what we must do instead is swing the focus back onto ourselves and wonder how the self-cherishing attitude constructs a view of ourselves as if we were somehow naturally superior, naturally elevated, naturally right. Kabje Zopa Rinpoche therefore asks us to precisely point the finger at who is to blame here. Rinpoche says, from cherishing the I, all the sufferings and problems come. It is the main blockage to achieving enlightenment for sentient beings. It is the greatest obstacle to being able to fully enlighten your mind to perfect perfectly the benefit of every single sentient being. The self-cherishing thought is the source of all the obstacles, all the misconceptions, all the sicknesses, even black magic, all the failures, not only in Dharma, but in business and worldly activities. Everything, all the failures, all the problems, all the sicknesses, whatever, it all comes from cherishing the I. End of quote. So Shantideva is indicating such self-serving is finally a vain and hopeless undertaking, even if the sour fruits aren't immediately obvious. In the training anthology, we find, quote, the sources of respect are said to be like a wish-fulfilling gem, but I do not have the happiness that comes from treating karmically unfortunate people with respect. Therefore, When I feel towards another sentient being rough, greedy, or proud, for example, through self-cherishing, I should transform that into its opposite through meditation. When it is sprinkled with praise and criticism, self-conceit grows, just as the fires of hell grow. End of quote. So the reference to the lower realms is not accidental here. Self-conceit, which is sort of the self-aggrandizement that is the grotesque fruit of self-cherishing, is of such a power that it can send us into these lower realms. But of course, we must be careful to apply this analysis to ourselves, as we are certainly endowed with self-cherishing, at least until we step onto the Bodhisattva's paths and grounds. So determining this requires a degree of self-analysis, utilizing the tools of analytical meditation to look inside ourselves and see just what we are capable of performing when armed with a powerful self-cherishing mind. So this is a meditation I do, and it's often very, very confronting because we remember events and incidents where our self-cherishing was up and away, and we performed dastardly deeds, inflicting some sort of damage or hurt on others at that time. And in our meditation, we sit and we wince with pain at the recognition. Did I actually say that to my friend? Did I actually do that to that person? And so it's really important here that the analytical meditation doesn't make a fundamental mistake of collapsing together I, me, and my self-cherishing, because they're not married together in this absolutely fused way at all. They're separate things. We can have a person without self-cherishing. We can't have self-cherishing without a person. That's another story. But we can uproot the causes of self-cherishing and have a person who is no longer self-cherishing. So we're not fundamentally self-cherishing at the time of having self-cherishing. We're only self-cherishing because of the causes and conditions being present for that self-cherishing to arise. And so thinking in this causal way helps us not to over-identify, because one of the problems of depression is often that we over-identify with our negative states of mind as really me, really us, and therefore I'm doomed to be this negative person, this self-cherishing person. Such a way of thinking has the capacity to turn on us and even damage us in analysis. So that's not what we're doing here. We're trying to adopt the stance of an impartial, objective, benign observer, I, the meditator, quietly investigating those locations and situations in which my own person has been driven by powerful self-cherishing, and just looking at the aspect of those situations and then coming to some conclusion at the end. So this is why many of the commentaries on self-cherishing, in a sense, need to identify self-cherishing and recognize its faults, quote the 91st verse from the Lama Chopa, which is, "This chronic disease of cherishing myself is a cause giving rise to my unsought suffering. Perceiving this, I seek your blessings to blame, begrudge, and destroy the monstrous demon of selfishness." So this is the conclusion of our meditation, not to think, oh, I'm self-cherishing, I'm capable of it, but to use that recognition as an intense resolve. Perceiving this, I seek your blessings, referring to the triple gem, to blame, begrudge, and destroy the monstrous demon of selfishness. That isn't me. It is the monstrous demon of selfishness itself that needs to be pulverized. So this great task of destroying the demon of selfishness is our most pressing task. We must put all the blame on this self-cherishing thought. As Rinpoche also mentions, it is the great masquerader, the great betrayer, the greatest con artist, if you prefer. Rinpoche says, although you have continually asked the self-cherishing thought for help, it never has. There are many stories like that. You always harbour in your mind any harm a person has given you with body, speech, and mind. You always keep it in your mind, getting angry back. Then, if you can, you harm them back. This is what people normally do. But now you use that example and you do the same to the self-cherishing thought, your real enemy, Mara, the demon. Whatever harm it has given you, you harbour it. That is your real enemy, the self-cherishing thought. In reality, there is no external enemy, only in your mind, the self-cherishing thought. So let's just do a short analytical, or in our own way, a short reflective meditation now, just to see if we can identify the operation of the self-cherishing thought in our own lives, particularly in relation to a particular incident, and just quietly observe its aspects. Make it an actual incident, not an imaginary one. And now, very quietly and gently, turn our focus onto the self-cherishing mind itself and resolve to banish it right where it appears. And instead, generate the thought of cherishing others. Not just cherishing others, but cherishing others more than ourselves. And with that, we conclude the meditation. I sort of give that meditation as a sample. It's the sort of thing that we can actually take time off during the course of a day. I would suggest when we have a little incident of self-cherishing in a sort of blatant form, if you can, step aside and do a little micro meditation on that moment and see if you can transform the attitude. And so exchanging self and others, of course, is the perfect solution, the perfect way of working with the self-cherishing attitude. So Kabje Zopa Rinpoche says, usually we live our lives letting go of others and cherishing ourselves. That has been our practice from beginningless lives until now. This is how we have been living our lives, but there has been no end to experiencing problems and suffering. Can you imagine? You have had problems for beginningless rebirths, and you still haven't finished your problems because of the self-cherishing thought. You have never given up the self-cherishing thought, and you have always cherished this I. Whereas with the countless numbers of sentient beings, you have been careless with their happiness, careless with their lives. The proof is that. The first thing is to change your mind, your attitude. You change the root of the problem, the self-cherishing thought, into cherishing others, the root of happiness for yourself, up to enlightenment, and for numberless sentient beings. By cherishing the numberless sentient beings, you open the door to the happiness of enlightenment for yourself and all the happiness for all the sentient beings up to enlightenment. Sorry, Rinpoche adds, I should have done the all longer. So as we know from listening to Rinpoche, Rinpoche would have said, and all the happiness for all sentient beings. Just sort of showing that encyclopedic embrace of this wondrous thought. So returning to Shantideva's verse, if we've indeed generated even a skerrick of cherishing others at long last, and perhaps not without an intense struggle, then how could we not be spontaneously happy when observing the happiness of others, including the happiness and joy experienced by those we might even have formerly labelled our worst enemies? Geshe Topton says, quote, everything we do must be for the sake of others' joy. And even if it costs us money, it is worth it. We should feel glad and rejoice when someone is engaged in spiritual practice. Since we are all doing all we can for the good of others, we will obtain what we desire effortlessly. When we act positively, someone will always be there to ask us whether we need anything, and in our future lives too, we will surely experience happiness. So Geshe Topton illustrates this with a personal anecdote. A few days ago, some people who lived nearby invited me over for tea. A woman named Carla was their guest, and they were all very happy with her because she was very helpful and kind to them. Their positive judgment was a result of Carla's correct behaviour. If she'd been angry or acted rudely, they would not have been pleased to have her in their home. Those same people observed, quote, you are Buddhists and we are Christians, but now we realise that Buddhists are not so different from Christians, end of quote. So this anecdote nicely illuminates how barriers erected by self-cherishing dissolve away when cherishing others is in play. Kabje Zopa Rinpoche, as I've already intimated, explains that the practice of exchanging self and others is the very, very best method for generating cherishing others. And this takes us to the very heart of the Bodhisattva's practice. Rinpoche says, the essential way to practice exchanging self for others is to regard the suffering of others exactly as our own suffering and to help others as if they were ourselves. We need to completely change our old motives and selfish actions. Abandoning self-cherishing and cherishing only others is the Bodhicitta method. Nurture the mind that cares only about alleviating the suffering of others with a sincere, generous, and uncrooked attitude. This is how the Bodhisattva acts, renouncing herself and focusing only on the well-being of others. So we need to take a reality check here, because as Rinpoche continues, we are nowhere near approximating this state of mind. Every time we encounter any living being in hardship, we should feel as if that other being's body and mind were our own. We need to cultivate this attitude to the point where we experience whatever is happening to that other person's body and mind as also happening to us. If we do not equalize others with ourselves, many realizations will not come. We must train our minds to feel another's bodily sensations or mental anguish as our own. So I've quoted Kapajata Rinpoche at some length here, because without having this framework, our practice of rejoicing will carry no weight or have no coherent purpose, because we will only consider joy or only interpret joy in terms of self-cherishing. Our convulsions of love and hatred, considered in their self-cherishing sense, are merely hysterical displays to entertain and thus serve the self-cherishing mind. These dreadfully constricted, afflicted emotions really have no bearing on the welfare or otherwise of anybody else, but they do impact them, because driven by self-cherishing, we will seek to utilize and exploit others for our own immediate gain. I was going to say, or add, superficial gain, because that own immediate gain can be as simple, alarmingly, as simple as taking a hoard of food that's in short supply secretly away from the cupboard that others might have used to access the same food. We've taken that food for ourselves, leaving them with a bare shelf, hungry. This is kind of a metaphor for the way in which the self-cherishing attitude accrues its resources. So the next heading, being skillful in the actions of the three doors, has three subheadings: how to act when one speaks, how to act when one looks, and only relating oneself to virtuous actions. How to act while one speaks relates to verse 79. When talking, I should speak from my heart and on what is relevant, making the meaning clear and the speech pleasing. I should not speak out of desire or hatred, but in gentle tones and in moderation. What need to comment? Talking over one's partner, interrupting before they can even complete their sentence, is an obvious example of speech that is neither gentle nor moderate. I had my own example of this recently, when a partner of someone constantly stepped in and answered the question on behalf of their spouse, not even letting that person open their lips. And they were sort of sitting there kind of awkwardly thinking, fidgeting, because they'd been disempowered, disvoiced, if you like. So one wonders, therefore, why oneself, must feel the inclination to raise one's voice so assertively in such circumstances, so much so that they can even cause the cutlery on the table to reverberate. So speaking with clear meaning on what is relevant and stems from the heart, and also speaking pleasantly, is also clearly something necessary for Dharma teachers, or those of us wishing to share the Dharma. So we find this in the 4 ways of gathering disciples: being generous, which includes giving gifts of material things and so forth; making talk pleasant to hear; teaching in accordance with one's own personal disposition, and acting in conformity with each person's disposition and acting in conformity with one's own self, not being a hypocrite. So talk pleasant to hear here does not refer to euphonious or musical sounds issuing from one's throat so much as the tenor of one's speech. One's speech shouldn't assume a structure and a direction. One's speech should assume a structure and a kind of tenor, a direction suitable to the circumstances. In other words, it should be inviting and also palatable, and most of all, be meaningful to hear. Due to this, the listener will be inclined to listen intently and reach towards the meaning of what is being said or shared. They will also wish to retain the content of what is being said. So if words issue from a deep place in the heart and are thus untainted by trivial or extraneous concerns, they are likely to be received with the intensity and clarity that they deserve. Having said this, we don't want to be overwhelming people with our heartfelt intensity 24 hours a day, do we? We have to lighten up too. That's part of the playfulness of making talk pleasant to hear. But we're doing it in order to let the other person relax and have some space in which to be. This is an act of generosity that we're offering them through the gentle mode of presenting our speech. So if our voice is imbued with strong love and compassion, then even if the message it is imparting is somehow challenging or confronting, it will nonetheless reach across the space between speaker and listener in an unbroken fashion. So those of us who have studied the Eightfold Noble Path will also recognize here the path of right speech, which refers to speech conceived as practice. So I'm going to quote here briefly from Patricia Phelan, who is a Dogen, a Zen practitioner. She says, in addition to not lying, not slandering, and not praising self, right speech includes avoiding idle chatter and gossip, and not speaking harshly or using abusive speech. The right of speech has the meaning of completed or perfected. Through right speech, by not indulging in and listening to such things as lying, backbiting, harsh speech, or gossip, we can establish a link between our mental activity and our conduct, or between right thought and right action, two other aspects of the Eightfold Path. She adds, conscious speech is a rich practice where we not only practice awareness of what we say and how we say it, but at a deeper level, we begin to notice the impulse, the driving force that propels us into speech, and how our state of mind and energy are affected before, during, and after speaking. This practice shifts the precepts from being a standard used to modify our behavior to a way of working with our state of mind, the source of all speech. End of quote. So I find this a really excellent explanation. This idea of conscious speech is really valuable to hold on to. And it also involves conscious listening. This is an art that must be acquired through our meditational training in mindfulness itself. And this invokes the topic of the mindful establishments that I mentioned last week in relation to the Satipatthana Sutta. So I wanted now to raise a kind of aspect of right speech, which is the power of silence. If we can cultivate mindfulness of speech, we'll also come to recognize the great power of silence. Sometimes it is more eloquent not to speak. Not to speak, to rush to fill in the gaps. The Zen approach to palliative care and end-life care is an exemplary example here. Buddhist chaplains are trained to find a place of rest in the middle of things. Zen teacher Joan Halifax, in her book Being with Dying, is a great place to start. Her book is a great place to start if we wish to investigate the application of mindfulness to end care further. For example, she says, and I quote, "Often we feel that silence and stillness aren't good enough when suffering is present. We feel compelled to do something, to talk, console, work, clean, move around, help. But in the shared embrace of meditation, a caregiver and a person who is dying can be held in an intimate silence beyond consolation or assistance." End of quote. So this doesn't mean that speaking, asking questions, and chatting are not important in this situation. Rather, it is to alert ourselves to the fact that the dying person is the one who will initiate such an action if they feel it is appropriate or necessary to do so. This is perfectly, absolutely appropriate, as it is they who are dying and perhaps only have minutes or hours to live. So if we sort of don't have control over our speech, we try to pour our speech content into their last moments because of some urgent need we have. So we, in effect, invade their space. So we can ask gently, is there anything we can do for them at that moment? But this is not an example of inappropriate speech. Perhaps they want some water in their mouth as it is very dry, or they wish a message, a last message, to be sent to someone who is absent or delayed, perhaps a family member or a friend. The point, if speech is to occur, it should be exactly what is needed. And additionally, this is not the time to proselytize, to impose one's own spiritual points of view. Personal need, again, would be driving this dogmatizing impulse. To seek to proselytize in such fragile, even dire circumstances might even be considered a violation of the integrity of the dying person. This is because they may be too weak to indicate or to say. I mention this in passing, as I know that some of us are engaged in important end care work. So the summary of the intent of the verse, in the words of Geshe Topton, when talking to others, our words should be understandable, sensible, and devoid of negative motivation. We should not assail them by speaking of personal matters because they would tire them. End of quote. So personal matters here would be chatter about the stuff of our lives, stuff that is finally of no interest or concern to anyone other than ourselves. Even for ourselves, it might be no more than excessive clutter. How much of our talk is just letting off a kind of steam, if you like, an egotistical steam, because there's too much mentation going on? Of course, if telling a personal story has some specific benefit, then that is a different matter. So Geshe Doga once said that a Buddhist might even write a detailed biography of their own lives if that serves a spiritual purpose of inspiring others to practice. It needn't be an egotistical indulgence. So we can tell personal stories, but again, it's coming down to why. So it's a matter of intention. Above all, we are to be wary of firing the sharp arrow of speech from the bow of the tongue, a reference to harsh speech. This is a metaphor drawn from the Lojong teachings. Immense harm can be done in just a matter of seconds in this uncontrolled way. The poetic analogy is drawn from the training anthology of Shantideva. So he's actually quoting this Lojong text there. And of course, the same can be said of divisive speech and slander. Our next heading, how to act while one looks, verse 80, when beholding someone with my eyes, thinking, I shall fully awaken through depending on this being, I should look at him with an open heart and love. Looking here is just an example, but for most of us, it's also a very pertinent one, as the eye-sense consciousness is a major conduit to engaging the things of this world. But if, for example, we're visually challenged, we can simply substitute another sense consciousness here in this verse because the logic of the verse remains intact. So returning to this issue of seeing, Geshe Jumpo Gyaltsen says in his commentary, this example illustrates how when we look at someone, we can remember that due to sentient beings, we are able to achieve complete enlightenment. In relation to others, we develop love and compassion and all the qualities needed to achieve enlightenment. When looking at people around us, we should view them in a way that a glass of cold water refreshes us when very thirsty. In any action, the focus should be on virtue, not only when speaking or looking at others. So this image of the looking at others being like a refreshing glass of water when we're thirsty is really a very, very wondrous and interesting analogy, isn't it? That should be the sense of recognition and delight that we have when we see others. But to get to this point requires very transformational work. Within the exchanging self and others technique for generating bodhicitta, for example, we come to see the advantages of cherishing others in dependence on having first generated a realization of the advantages in depends on a realization of the equality of self and others, followed by an intense investigation in meditation and outside of meditation on the faults of the self-cherishing attitude, as we've sort of already touched upon. And this is to be done from many viewpoints. Only then is it followed by the meditation of the advantages of cherishing others. You can see here there's these cumulative steps leading to this capacity to cherish others. In the instructions pertaining to this last point, we're asked to view everyone with great kindness and concern, because without them, without relying on them, we have no scope, no opportunity to practice a bodhisattva's path and thus achieve full enlightenment. This is the sentiment in Shantideva's verse. And this is rendered explicit also by a small suite of verses that we find in the next chapter of the text. I'll read these. 112. Therefore, the Mighty One has said that the field of sentient beings is similar to a Buddha field for many who have pleased them and have thereby reached perfection. 113. A Buddha's qualities are gained from the sentient beings and the conqueror alike. So why should I not respect them in the same way as I respect the conquerors, and 114. Of course, they are not similar in the quality of their intentions, but only in the fruits that they produce. So in this respect, that they have excellent qualities, they are therefore said to be equal. So in terms of obtaining our enlightenment goal, sentient beings are to be regarded as exactly as kind as all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. This is the point that's being made. And to comprehend this radical thought requires a comprehensive understanding of the Mahayana vehicle, together with a thorough grounding in the Lam Rim. Speaking of how we come to generate an open and loving heart towards others, His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, quote, "As said, achieving Buddhahood comes from the kindness of venerable sentient beings, and moreover from the network of sentient beings who work hard to supply our amenities, such as all our delicious food and beverages, our accessories and beautiful clothing that protect us from the elements, and our housing, including all furnishings. Take, for example, our homes that we live in comfortably, thanks to the kindness and hard work of builders who ignore the hardships of heat, cold, thirst, and hunger to build them. In brief, from the day we are born until our deaths, our lives are entirely dependent on venerable sentient beings. We cannot survive from eating rocks, dirt, or grass. And thus the fact we have been able to keep this so-called precious human body alive, that this precious human body that we consider so valuable, is entirely due to the kindness of venerable sentient beings. Accomplishing our aims and training in the path that will bring high status, rebirths, and so forth too, is due to the kindness of others. Ultimately, generating the mind directed towards full enlightenment for the sake of achieving omniscience also depends on focusing on sentient beings, all sentient beings, and thus their kindness is incredibly great. Merely thinking of bodhicitta brings joy to the mind. Merely listening to its meaning bestows happiness to the heart. It has power too, and likewise blessings. It is your companion and the friend that will protect you in difficult times. This immeasurable, noble attitude of bodhicitta, compared with which there is nothing higher from the point of view of being a good quality, integral to the beginning, middle, and end, is absolutely astonishing and the ultimate wish-fulfilling jewel. So this wonderful quote is sourced from a recently published book. I'll just share it. The 14th Dalai Lama's Stages of the Path, which is a commentary on the 5th Dalai Lama's oral transmission of Manjushri. So it's one of the great Lam Rim texts, and His Holiness' extensive commentary is included in these pages. So it is by training in the recognition of the kindness of others in these ways that we arrive at a point where we can actually look, we haven't left Shantideva's verse behind, at the sentient beings with an open heart and love, upon merely seeing them, beholding them with our gaze. Upon seeing them, spontaneously, the thought will come, I should fully awaken depending on this sentient being. This doesn't mean we leave it at that, because our warm, embracing attitude should also be considered as a establishment of a karmic bond, a duty of care with this person that we've just seen. And so therefore, we're going to commit, resolve to act for them in whatever skillful manner is possible, both now and in the future, and sincerely dedicate the merits towards that goal, which is their own full enlightenment. So in his commentary on this point, Geshe Tobten notes that there are three merit fields referring to sources of merit and wisdom here. And these are going to come up again shortly in a few verses, but I'll mention them now. The first are the objects of refuge, which is referred to as the excellent and superior field. That's the best, the greatest. Then come parents and teachers who constitute the field of benefit. And thirdly come sentient beings who constitute the field of suffering. So it's very helpful to take this threefold presentation on board. Otherwise, we run a certain risk of only feeling we're inclined to pay respect to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, the somehow holy objects, while ignoring our parents and our teachers, and ignoring suffering sentient beings who are actually the reason for our bodhicitta practice and our reason for engaging in the six perfections. As Geshe Jampa Tekchok says, great compassion is developed by depending on sentient beings because they are the referent. The object, compassion, refers to, observes, focuses upon, or thinks about suffering sentient beings. Thus, just as great compassion is necessary at the beginning, middle, and end of the path, so too are sentient beings invaluable and important at these times, because great compassion cannot be generated without them. End of quote. Therefore, the root of all qualities of the Bodhisattva vehicle is caring for sentient beings. So what does caring mean here? Geshe Jampa Tekchok again. Caring for sentient beings means freeing them from suffering of unfortunate rebirths and of psychic existence in general, teaching the Dharma to those who wish to hear it, providing the means for them to eliminate the causes which bring both temporary and ultimate happiness, not harming them, not lying to them, not creating discord among them, not speaking harshly to them, and so on. Through caring about them now, excellent results will follow for us and for them. So perhaps we're now better situated to appreciate the profundity embodied in Shantideva's apparently simple instruction to use the occasion of seeing to establish a potent and poignant bond. One that we might call a cosmologically vast duty of care, because from now on, we will never abandon our concern for this particular sentient being, the one that we've just seen. Any sentient being that appears becomes this one, that we definitely won't abandon them through this act of seeing. So in this way, we can see that we particularize all sentient beings as special upon merely seeing them. And this greatly enriches our capacity to relate to others. So I'm emphasizing particular here because if we think of sentient beings and their needs only in some abstract, generic, mass fashion, we won't be really challenged to develop a love and compassion that can embrace all other sentient beings, from the tiniest worm to the beings in the celestial realms. This is because there would be no incentive to work out or iron out the varieties of partiality we have according to self-cherishing, which we've assiduously developed over samsaric time, where we regard people through the lenses of friend, enemy, and strangers here referring to the vast slab of sentient beings who it just happened to have not become enemies or friends in that particular moment. So this is all, considering all this together, is why His Holiness in that passage I read refers to venerable sentient beings. There's something really special here in this addition of the honorific venerable. And what I want to just crystallize at the end of this sort of part of the topic is that our love and compassion, which is dependent on looking here, isn't predicated upon having had to already know that person who is appearing. This is how radical the Bodhisattva attitude is. The mere fact of their appearance isn't sufficient for fully fledged love and compassion for them to arise. We don't have to know anything. This is getting back to Jay's earlier question, I think, in an interesting way. We don't have to know anything about what they do or don't do. The mere fact that they are there in front of us as an example of a suffering sentient being is sufficient for our concern to be fully there. So I just want to suggest here an exercise which we won't do in the session, but it might be something you'd like to explore in your daily lives. I suggested that we do the exercise of smiling to each person we meet in the course of a day. Now I'm going to suggest an extension of that exercise, which is to view each person whom we see during the course of a day with a warm, open mind of compassion and independence on that to dedicate to ensure that our karmic relationship with them will be secured in a precise and targeted manner, one that Kabje Zopa Rinpoche refers to as tipping the wish. So we don't just think, oh, I hope that you're happy. I've seen you. I really hope that you're going to be happy. We say, may I, through training in the Bodhisattva's deeds, hold your hand and rescue you so that you can become fully happy. I make this commitment in both the next and all future lives up until enlightenment. So this is tipping the wish, and we can do this in a very brief space of time if we're trained in that practice. So the next main topic, relating oneself only to virtuous actions, has its own 3 subheadings, sort of sub-subheadings overall. Practicing generosity to the special field of offering, creating virtue through one's own power, out of one's own power, and increasing one's virtue ever more and thinking about the purpose. So practicing generosity to the special field of offering refers to verse 81, which reads, after being motivated by the great aspiration of being motivated by the remedial forces, if I work in the fields of excellence, benefit, and misery, great virtues will come about. So if we've been listening carefully, we'll notice that we have the reappearance here of the 3 fields of virtue. The objects of refuge, the excellent and superior field, called the field of excellence, parents and teachers, who constitute the field of benefit, and sentient beings who constitute the field of suffering, misery. Here, they are being depicted in this verse as motivators of our bodhicitta practice. In other words, by encountering them, engaging with them, we are being immediately stimulated to practice. Or at least this will be the case if we've been training in the path or towards the path. Shantideva is also identifying the great aspiration to enlightenment itself as a motivator. This is an important recognition, as we might otherwise fall into a lazy or unexamined view that holds aspiration to be a somehow static, abstract object, rather than a vital, constantly unfolding modality of consciousness itself. It's a dynamic mind of bodhicitta involving both engaged and aspirational aspects. To aspire, in other words, and more precisely to aspire greatly, as Shantideva is asking here, therefore represents a heartfelt yearning that arises constantly and organically links our behaviour links our behaviour to the aspirational wish itself. So we begin to act in accordance with the aspiration. So this is how we're to approach the mind of bodhicitta, being considered as a primary consciousness. I'm just going to say a few words here. His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Thupten Chodron explained that bodhicitta is a primary mental consciousness. As such, it is accompanied by, is committant with various mental factors, a principal one being the aspiration to attain full awakening. How does this aspiration arise? Contemplation of the kindness of sentient beings and their dukkha in samsara causes great compassion, which is the mental factor wishing sentient beings to be free from suffering. So the observed object here of compassion is sentient beings. Strong meditation on great compassion causes the inspiration to benefit sentient beings. This aspiration, the text is continuing, leads us to examine how best to benefit sentient beings, and we conclude that is through attaining the qualities of a Buddha. Thus, the aspiration for full enlightenment is born. This aspiration accompanies the primary mind of bodhicitta. So the observed object of bodhicitta is bodhi, referring to our own full awakening. Bodhicitta is directed towards full awakening because we want to work for the welfare of all other sentient beings by attaining full awakening. Wisdom is the force which will purify the mind and transform it into a purely awakened mind of a Buddha. The observed object of this wisdom is emptiness. End of quote. So returning now to the words of Shantideva's verse, it is clear that the aspiration, or the great aspiration here, is none other than the most precious mind of bodhicitta itself, focused upon our own enlightenment, together with the concomitant mental factors according to which we observe and focus upon the needs to rescue our suffering mothers. So surely this aspiration, this great aspiration, is the most pure and the most all-embracing aspiration that we have ever managed to muster. And as such, it is indeed the greatest motivator. This is the point. If we can place all of our actions in front of the impulse of this great aspiration, then all of the stages of the path will fall into place and begin to unfold organically. So, to just elaborate a little bit more, in the opening line, we have a reference to always being motivated by great aspiration. This always is deeply significant because it means that we don't just have this aspiration once or twice or on occasion, sometimes, if circumstances permit, etc., etc. What it means is that this great motivating force is always present, always informing our actions of body, speech, and mind, night and day. Thereby, its inordinate force, its sheer immense capacity is registered. This is not an ordinary mind in any sense whatsoever. It is truly remarkable. So in his commentary of this verse, Sonam Senmo interprets aspiration to mean increasing one's resolve. But this, I think, is compatible with aspiration considered as the mind aspiring to achieve enlightenment for oneself on behalf of others, especially if we take resolve to refer to the special attitude, indicating the stage in the generation of the mind of enlightenment, wherein we actually undertake the responsibility, the burden of working exclusively for the welfare of others. Such a resolution, such a resolve to take on this burden is the most extraordinary thing, and it is the foundation of the mind of enlightenment itself being able to arise. So in this verse is also mention of being motivated by the remedial forces. This refers to an antidotal forces that have been variously applied to thwart the various emotional afflictions. So, for example, love replacing hatred, non-attachment replacing desire, or covetousness with generosity, or humility replacing pride, etc. As Geshe Jumpa Tekchok indicates, these antidotes are to be regarded as the discordant class. They are discordant to the afflicted minds. This means they're exactly antithetically opposed and will therefore erode them if we manage to muster them. We cannot have both those minds simultaneously present. So this is really, really necessary to understand. So this notion of discordant class indicates how when such antidotal minds are generated, because they are discordant to the afflicted minds themselves, they cause them to weaken or fail. They are effectively blocked or quelled, in other words. To swing this together with the earlier account of the three fields of excellence, these antidotal forces are performed in reliance on the three fields of excellence. And this reliance grants them immense power. For example, the field composed of the holy objects of refuge is an object endowed with immense power. Indeed, it is the maturation of all great virtuous qualities. Therefore, if we perform virtuous actions in dependence on such a special field of offering, it will carry unbelievable, inconceivable power. Caring for our precious parents and teachers might also be considered in the same especially karmically potent way. This is why killing a parent is regarded as one of the heaviest karmic acts. Fortunately, the opposite is true. But benefiting and caring for our parents has incredible power due to the closeness of our current karmic relationship. out of all the wombs in the universe, it was our mother of this life that nurtured us and enabled our birth. So it was our mother of this life. Indeed, we can't even talk of our precious human rebirth without. We might otherwise have been reborn as a magpie or even as a hungry ghost if we had the karmic imprints for such a rebirth. Geshe Doga, therefore, in his commentary on this verse, stresses how this reliance on the field of benefit, the second of the three, referring to one's parents and teachers, vindicates or endorses his own frequent heartfelt advice to his students that they must look after their aging parents or their parents when they become frail. So often I witness this over and over. Dharma students are sort of doing their practices and doing really, really solid, committed practice. And then suddenly a parent takes ill and the parent's living 500 kilometres away in a small town outside of Brisbane and they're living in Melbourne. What do they do? And Geshe Doga says, go and look after your mother. He says this over and over and over again. And I have a friend, I won't mention names, it would be inappropriate, but her relationship with her mother was, shall we say, somewhat fraught historically. Still, she got this advice from Geshe Doga, and you'll be happy to hear she went. And it's been an intensely meaningful time for practice for her. She's managed to be there for the time in which her mother is making the transition to aged care and trying to do this in the most supportive and beneficial way possible, given her frailty. So these are real issues for us, and they're very much real issues for us in our current social climate, I think, when the I was going to just quickly say this, the corporatization of aged care is becoming more and more prevalent. Outside Kyneton, my little town, we have 5,500 people. A huge company has built a mega retirement village on the outskirts of South Kyneton, into which one disappears at some point in life if one doesn't have family members there to pull one back. So I'm not saying they're not a good place. I'm not criticizing it, but I'm just saying this is a really interesting kind of scenario. And so many of us are going to be faced with real and often very difficult questions surrounding how we might best look after our parents. So we're actually dealing here with the virtue of generosity. We're training to give whatever is needed to sentient beings, especially the poor, the ill, the hungry, those afraid and living in war zones, and so forth. And their numbers are endless. Though for reasons of practicality, we might only choose to work or be able to work, for example, through a single food distribution charity, by offering ourselves as a volunteer to prepare or serve food in a soup kitchen, whatever, we must utilize this activity by expanding it outwards to embrace all suffering sentient beings. And so we use the actual experience of helping with that one bowl of soup to make this commitment to giving resources to all sentient beings in the same unified gesture. So we then dedicate both specifically to the person to whom we're offering the soup and to beings universally. And this has great efficacy because, once again, our field of merit, suffering sentient beings in this case, is intensely strong. It is massive. And therefore, great virtues will come about, as Shantideva says, as the conclusion of the verse. So the takeaway point of all of this is to understand the need to perform all our virtuous actions in tandem with the aspirational mind. Geshe-Doga says, furthermore, engaging in virtue must be accomplished by a clear wish, which is a strong aspiration, and that it serves as an antidote against the opposing side, the delusions, such as attachment and so forth. Thus, the accumulation of virtue has to be accompanied with a strong aspiration and ensuring that it serves as an antidote to overcoming the opposite side. So there are these two aspects there. There are two aspects to our engagement here, and they must be coalesced intricately together. So Geshe-Doga illustrates with an example. When one engages in the virtual generosity, one needs to ensure that it becomes an antidote to overcoming miserliness. And when one practices morality, one must antidote to overcome corrupt ethics and so forth. He continues, the emphasis here is that when one accumulates virtue, one needs to ensure that it actually becomes an antidote to overcoming an opposing non-virtual state of mind, specifically the delusions. If you do not apply the practice in this way, you will find that there is not much transformation taking place in the mind. As the great Kadampa master advised, one needs to engage in practice and ensure that it serves as a means to subdue one's mind by overcoming the delusions. So that should be the main purpose in accumulating virtue. So we could go on here, but I'm thinking I might stop the presentation. There's been quite a lot of detail, but it's been very clearly held together by Shantideva's powerful arguments. And I would now like to just throw it open for some general discussion and sharing of thoughts that we might have. Maybe it stirred something up for you.
Well, thank you, Ross. I found that just very practical, very down to earth. One thing I enjoyed was just having that brief meditation break that you gave us, micro meditation, you called it, which is good to kind of cement a certain idea, you know, a certain thought. I think I'll leave it at that tonight. I'm having some network difficulties, so I'm not even sure if I'm coming through to you guys.
No, you're quite clearly, but thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
I think there's sort of a tendency often, isn't there, to hear these teachings and often over and over again, and nonetheless somehow manage to maintain our customary behavior unmodified. So Geshe-Doga is really, especially in this last point, trying to say that unless one is ensuring that we're going to benefit sentient beings and that we're going to overcome an afflicted mind within our own continuum, we can't claim to be practicing virtue. Virtue isn't an abstract state. It's a process of enabling things to become in a particular way. It is incredibly instrumental and dynamic and only makes sense in terms of engagement. So I feel that's really, really important. And so the moments in which our aspiration to virtue flounders are precisely those moments that we should take some time off to do a micro meditation. What is going on? there? How come we've lost our edge? The words, we're hearing the words, but they're not working. They're not being realized. They're merely being heard. So there's a difference here between realization and hearing. And so this is why all the texts and all the great lamas enforce that we have to constantly reinforce these points over and over and over again in order for them to have some capacity to actually transform the mind. How did the discussion of silence work? Did anyone relate to the idea of silence being potent in that way? And do we actually allow for that kind of potency or the space of that potency in our lives sufficiently? Or do we run over the top of it with a veneer of chatter in order not to have any socially awkward gaps? I think this is a really real topic to bring up. Yeah.
I have to say, Ross, I was really grateful to hear that. In particular, just a personal experience, sitting with someone very close and just being there. And there's definitely kind of a temptation to, as you say, proselytize. Something, but out of, a good intention, just wanting to help and wanting to share something that helped you. But as you point out, may be entirely inappropriate at in that person's situation. So I found that very, very helpful.
I think, in my own case, I'm devoid of the accomplishment of clairvoyance. And as a consequence, I can't really necessarily tell what's going on in someone's mind. And so for that reason alone, it's perhaps often skillful to veer on the side of caution and remain silent. If I knew what was going on in someone's mind, as would Kabje Zopa Rinpoche visiting someone on their deathbed, everything that would unfold in Rinpoche's behavior would be perfectly appropriate. But I'm not at that point. I mean, I can aspire to it, but given that, one needs to look very carefully at one's motivation. So that's the point, isn't it? Yeah. Our society doesn't value silence, does it? In fact, it fills up silence as quickly as it can with spam. Just look at your phone. It's just flooded with stuff. There's no gaps there at all. We're super hyper-saturated all the time with downloading. And so silence for me is a way of stepping away from the download and trying to regroup how might I respond in the world from my position now, and having some sort of sense of clarity and space to do that requires real work. And it's not necessarily socially supported, that kind of work, because you're seeing not to be participating. You're stepping out of the social network in some way and acting a little bit strangely, which would become perhaps contemplative or choosing to live alone, or these could be, decisions of great clarity and great courage and great benefit, immensely so. And it's certainly easier to do retreats in those environments because we have, the kind of framework for sitting without being disturbed. These are very, very precious situations. And so in our current world, these opportunities are becoming less and less, things are becoming more and more crowded. And so I think Buddhism is going to have to undergo not its transformation in terms of its principles, but the way we adapt it's going to have to be transformed in significant ways to relate to the kind of world we're living in. We look at the Lam Rin text and see the need to develop calm abiding as a prerequisite for special insight. Well, yes, we do. But how many of us have the conditions in place to do a calm abiding retreat where we could generate fully accomplished calm abiding. So we need to be looking at the thought transformation techniques in a very, very concerted way. So I had the fortune of seeing Kabje Zopa Rinpoche in Dharamsala several months before his passing into Parinirvana, along with other people. I was just in Dharamsala for His Holiness's teachings, as was Kabje Zopa Rinpoche and other lamas. And Rinpoche was leading a guru puja in the Dashita Gompa for the retreatants who had just done their first retreat. And as a culmination of the retreat, Rinpoche visits the students and gives them some words of advice. And for the students, it's incredibly exciting. Many of them haven't met an extraordinary being like Rinpoche before. And Rinpoche, in the midst of the puja, arrived, I've mentioned this point once before in my presentations, arrived at the point of the need for the faults of self-cherishing attitude, the need to exchange self and others. And Rinpoche said, Lojong, everything you need is here. Everything. And he shouted out everything for over 5 minutes until the room was rocking with laughter. It was his way, his unique way of driving home this point that the Lojong teachings, the thought transformation teachings, are the quintessence of the practice of the Bodhisattva. And so to take that away was the most wonderful thing. To have the seed of that thought in one's mind is the most extraordinary seed to ripen, that will ripen in the future. So I'm just sharing that. Yeah. So we might just spend a few moments in meditation, just bringing our mind inwards. And just reflecting on the import, the vast import of Shantideva's request that every action of our body, speech and mind will be intent on increasing virtue and that this is accompanied by the great aspiration to become fully enlightened ourselves, referring to our own resultant Buddhahood, in order to be best positioned to benefit others, but also that our actions of body, speech, and mind will be focused upon applying antidotal forces, forces of the discordant kind, to the afflictions themselves. And in this way, we guarantee mental transformation, actual transformation. This is the technology for achieving change. So see if we can consolidate this in our mind and carry it throughout the course of our day. So with that, we'll dedicate. It's almost a dedication already. So thank you, everyone. So I'll ask Lou to kindly lead our concluding prayers. Or maybe, oh no, there we go.
Shantideva. For as long as space endures, and for as long as living beings remain, until then may I too abide to dispel the misery of the world. May all the pains of living creatures ripen solely upon myself, and through the might of the Bodhisattva Sangha, may all beings experience happiness. May the teachings which are the sole medicine for suffering and the origin of every joy be materially supported and honored and abide for a long time. I prostrate to Manjughosha, through whose kindness wholesome minds ensue, and I prostrate to my spiritual masters, through whose kindness I develop. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha, and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen never diminish, but increase more and more. May my Venerable Lama's life be firm, his white divine action spread in the 10 directions, dispelling the darkness of all beings in the 3 realms. Long life prayers for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The wish granting was fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit, happiness in this world. The incomparable kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech. May all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until cyclic existence is ended. Prayer for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche. I need to get this computer replaced. Peerless teacher and assembly of children, the victorious ones, Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, together with lineage, all the opposite refuge of the infinite lands, please now bestow the virtue and goodness to accomplish this prayer. In holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you are the armor of patience that is never discouraged, incomparable of Guru. To you I make request. Sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, while striving exclusively for the welfare of towards one's teachings and mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. At this I lost hope. Nevertheless, to the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the 3 jewels, great waves of the mind generation, of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a new reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples.
Thank you very much. So I look forward to seeing you next week, and take care, and